So right now I'm just going to kind of go through some of the things that we've learned up to this point and summarize it into this diagram for you. So again, this is a transverse section of your spinal cord, and once again, this is going to be the front, the ventral side, and this is going to be the back, the dorsal side. We have the gray matter in the center, and we have the white matter on the outside. And if you remember from from section 6A, the lecture, we talk about in the center of the spinal cord, you have the central canal, which is going to be filled with the CSF coming down from the fourth ventricles. Okay, so what we're going to talk about once again is this. So for example, let's just say, this is your hand, and what you've just done is you've touched something sharp, okay, something like a pin or something, and you poke your finger with it, and then that piece of information is going to be picked up by a sensory neuron shown here in blue. So remember, there is not just one sensory neuron. In fact, there are going to be a bunch of them, and one connecting with the other, and eventually what's going to happen is you are going to enter at the dorsal side of your spinal cord, and is going to make a synaptic connection with an interneuron inside the gray matter of the spinal cord. So before we go on, right, I just want to remind you that this entire path that is made up of the sensory neuron. So this is made up of sensory neuron, and this entire path is what we call the afferent path, right? And as you recall, in lecture 5, afferent pathway takes information from the PNS towards the CNS, and now you know that that information is going to enter at the back of the spinal cord. So over here we have the green neuron, right, which resides exclusively inside the gray matter, and that is what we call the interneuron, right? The interneuron. Let me just try to put it right here. The interneuron. And the interneuron is going to do integration or information processing for you. In this particular case, is going to realize, for example, you just touch a sharp object and you should remove your finger from it. So after processing that information, right, in the gray matter and that interneuron, it's going to send that information out through this motor neuron. Okay, this motor neuron. So again, just like before, there is not just one motor neuron, but you are going to have many of them. Okay, so this path, right, is made up of motor neurons, and we call this the efferent pathway, which takes information from the CNS to the PNS. Okay, so this path that I just drew, right, is again the efferent pathway. And what's interesting is, even though they separate into two separate paths, with the afferent going in at the back and the efferent coming out at the front, this here, once it leaves the interventricular foramen, they are actually going to form an entire bundle together, right? And that is what we call the spinal nerves. Okay, so you wouldn't be able to see the individual afferent when it comes out as a spinal nerve. It would just be like a bundle together. But if you open that up, you would be able to see the distinct paths. It's kind of like a telephone line, if you would, right? If you just take the entire phone wire, it would just look like it's one thing, but when you cut it open, it actually has multiple smaller paths inside, and you can kind of think of it like that. So this is going to be exactly the same on the other side of the spinal cord. I'm not going to draw it because I don't want to confuse you. Now, where does the brain come into the picture? Well, brain is going to be somewhere up there, and it turns out what happens is when the information comes in at the back of the spinal cord, some of that information will be passed on to the interneuron, but another bit of the information actually is going to be transmitted to some of these tracks that are located at the back of the spinal cord. So located at the back of the spinal cord are bundles of axons that will actually take the information up towards your brain. So you would have, a lot of these things all located in the back, and together, right, we call these ascending tracks. Okay, so that information that you just poke yourself with a pin is going to be taken up to the brain. But before it reaches the brain, at the same time that it's going up the brain, I should say, that signal is already going out of the motor neuron. So a lot of times we don't realize we just touch a sharp object until after we remove the hand, and that's the reason. Because by the time you remove the hand, right, the signal is still kind of on the way up to the brain. And then when it gets up to the brain, it's going to process that information. And if further actions are required, that information will be coming down through these tracks that are now at the front, right? So we call those descending tracks. Okay. So again, ascending tracks takes information up towards the brain, and descending tracks takes information down from the brain. Okay, and that's kind of like the overview of what's happening, in terms of spinal cord. Now, what about the sides, right? What about the sides? It turns out the side of the spinal cord is kind of mixed. What that means is it contains both ascending and descending tracks. So we're not going to worry too much about it for the purpose of this course. It's okay to just generalize. It's usually ascending at the back and descending at the front.